energy powers our lives. We use energy to travel, to create, and to communicate. Energy is fundamental to the success of the human species. But today, securing and conserving energy has become a top priority for every nation.
Without electricity, you will notice it immediately. The lights in the room will go out, the fan or the air conditioning will stop. So energy is absolutely key to our lives.
And now, countries are being forced to rethink how energy is used and where that energy comes from.
Energy security matters. If you're dependent on one single technology too much, that can really be a risk.
In a volatile and increasingly uncertain world, how would countries with limited natural resources be energy secure? How do we ensure our energy security? Energy fuels our lives and our economies. It allows us to move, create, and live. As demand for energy grows, we begin to confront a so-called energy trilemma. That's the struggle between the security, affordability, and sustainability of energy. Energy sources changed over time.
All set, let her go.
When oil was discovered, it enabled the creation of mighty machines which helped build the modern world. But supplies and prices were sometimes unpredictable. In the 1970s, the world was thrown into turmoil when oil prices became volatile because of instability in the Middle East.
When the first oil crisis hit in 1973, oil prices quadrupled, and Singapore Consumer Price Index inflation soared to 21%.
Despite being largely sheltered from oil price shocks, Singapore was still struggling to secure its energy supply. In 1973, Singapore's finance ministry called on the public to voluntarily cut their electrical consumption by 10%.
In 1960s and 70s, Singapore was undergoing rapid urbanization. There were many high-rise buildings being constructed, and these residents in this building were provided with electricity. And the electricity also is needed to power the lifts, the water pumps, and all the equipments required in the building. At about the same time, there were major changes in the lifestyle and quality of life of Singapore. More people were able to afford electric appliances such as TVs and fridge. I remember we were staying in a HDB flats at that point in time. So we bought a TV. It was a black and white. It was such a sensation that our neighbors who were without TV came to our house and watched the TVs together with us. Electricity became a necessity to power Singaporeans' everyday life.
Decades later, Singaporeans were reminded again of that necessity. The date, September 29, 1992. A blackout occurred, a rare occurrence, but one of the worst in the city's history. By then, Singapore's electricity consumption had risen to about 3 times more than what it was in the 1970s.
We were told that there was a major fire in Senoko Power Station.
The fire caused an island-wide blackout. It had ravaged critical equipment and was spreading fast. Senoko Power Station provided nearly half of Singapore's total electricity needs at the time, and it had to be shut down.
As a young engineer, I was navigating the display for the chief engineer to brief the minister on the power system condition and options available to restore supply. Now, this blackout lasting for 13 hours was the longest in Singapore history.
Mr. Keng had another emergency to worry about on the day. His wife was 9 months pregnant. Labor pains kicked in on the afternoon of the blackout.
There was no power in the flat and the lifts were not working. Right? And yet she packed her overnight bag, walked down all the way 16th story and wait for me at the void deck so that I can fetch her to the hospital for delivery.
Blackouts are rare in Singapore. But the country's dependence on electricity supplies is growing. Singapore now uses close to 50,000 gigawatt hours of electricity per year, more than 3 times the amount in the 1990s. And the country diversifies its energy sources, so supplies are resilient. That includes harvesting from within the city. Solar panels are a common sight, on land and on the sea. Solar only amounts to a fraction of the country's generated electricity, but authorities are looking for ways to grow.
Well, solar is the most viable renewable energy resource that we have in Singapore. We do not have wind power, we don't have hydro or even tidal power. And while we have sun and solar energy, solar is intermittent. That's because of the extensive cloud cover that we have in Singapore. As clouds pass over solar panels, it causes fluctuations in electricity supply. And this is not well managed, it will affect the stability of the power grid. So Singapore will continue to push for solar deployment, and we will find innovative ways to deploy solar panels despite our small size.
New targets are already in place to grow solar deployment. The aim to achieve at least a 2 gigawatt peak of solar energy by 2030, equivalent to powering about 350,000 households for a year. Current deployment is at 350 megawatt peak, almost 6 times less than the new target. A new complex, still in construction, could be the model for solar generation in urban spaces. It's the new campus of Surbana Jurong, a consultancy firm that designs and manages mega projects in Singapore and around the world.
I think solar panel technology is ever improving. We are getting more efficient solar panels as we move along. But on top of that, it's also looking for space to install solar projects. So we explore looking at not only rooftop, looking at facade as well, looking at putting on ground or empty land that we can find, put it in reservoirs, and very soon we're going to deck it out in the sea as well.
Solar generation is growing, but it remains a fraction of Singapore's overall electricity supply. Natural gas is still the key energy source for the city. But geopolitical events occurring halfway around the world are causing energy prices to spike. There are far-reaching consequences for everyone. February 2022, Russia invades Ukraine. Reports stream in fast across the world showing destruction, death, and turmoil. One and a half thousand kilometers away, in Germany, war is having a direct impact on people's lives. Germany relies on Russian energy to power its economy and to heat its homes. The country now faces an energy crisis, with Russia having turned off the tap on gas supplies. Germany's energy woes are a case study on the pitfalls of not having diversified energy supplies.
We are in a situation where just now Russia has cut the exports that we're receiving through pipelines significantly, and there's a risk looming that actually this will drop to zero during the summer. So the government is scrambling to find alternative supplies, bringing coal plants back from reserves, but also there's a number of legislative proposals right now in Parliament to fast-track renewables and energy efficiency to really get structurally out of this dependence on fossil fuels.
Russia is one of the world's top 3 crude producers. It's also the second largest producer of natural gas.
The ties with Russia in terms of energy date back decades and have their roots in getting closer in times of Cold War. But actually, since the 2000s, the dependency has become very large, and at this point, more than 50% of the gas imports come from this one supplier, and now Russia has chosen to use it, one could almost say, as a weapon against Germany and Europe in this conflict.
About a third of Germany's natural gas supplies come from Russia through Nord Stream 1, a pipeline that runs under the Baltic Sea. A newly built parallel line, Nord Stream 2, was set to double Germany's gas supplies. But with the onset of the war in Ukraine, Nord Stream 2 is now an abandoned $11 billion project. And Russia has been threatening to cut off Nord Stream 1 energy supplies to Germany in retaliation to sanctions against them. This means Germany will need to find alternative sources for its energy needs. Until then, German households are facing increasing electricity prices.
Prior to the Ukraine-Russia crisis, we had quite high gas prices specifically, and that was due to the fact that the demand ramped up faster after the corona crisis than the supply did. And so basically that drove up prices, and something similar was observable also on the world market actually for oil.
A rare few Germans aren't too concerned about rising energy prices. Pierre Heineken lives with his 2 sons just outside Berlin.
To be honest, I haven't personally felt any effects of it because over the last years I have prepared my household not to be affected by this because I'm kind of self-sufficient.
The setup for the house, right now you can see that I'm getting 5.9 kilowatt from the roof. On a very sunny day, it will go up to 14.
Heineken's home produces all the energy it consumes, thanks to a number of solar panels installed. The home is also fully automated, which helps the family use energy more efficiently. In May, the EU proposed that solar panels were to be mandatory on all new buildings by 2029. Pierre feels it's too little, too late.
And the governments, usually when they do something, they will say, okay, every house has to have 2 panels on their roof. That's the new law. Wow, 2 panels. I have 47, and that brings me to the level that I'm in. So the 2 panels are basically ridiculous. And we know how it is. As soon as government says you have to do something, it's like with kids, you want to do it even less.
The new government that's been in place since the past year now really is doing everything it can to ramp up the expansion of renewables again. If we had done this a few years ago already, the situation today would be much better.
Germany had in fact begun thinking about an energy transition decades before recent supply woes. In the 2000s, Germany started to go big on wind energy. There are now more than 28,000 wind turbines in the country, generating almost a quarter of its electricity production, the highest in Europe. But production is expensive, and getting permits for wind turbines can take years. Nuclear was another source of energy available to Germany. In 2011, it contributed a quarter of energy supplies. But nuclear power is now planned to be phased out. Public sentiment for nuclear power fell after Japan's Fukushima reactor meltdown in 2011. An energy transition has been a long and difficult process for Germany. But there have been learning points in the country's ongoing journey to create a diverse energy mix with resilient supplies.
The first lesson is energy security matters. If you're dependent on one single technology too much, that can really be a risk. If you're dependent on one supplier too much, that can really be a risk. The new formula in Germany is called N-1, so basically it should be possible to lose one technology, one supplier, and still be in good shape. The second lesson is that actually now we're in a situation where renewable energies are a low-cost source, and they can often be a local source. So we can reconcile energy security, affordable energy, and protecting the environment by doubling down on the energy transition, and that's a lesson that you will see play out in Germany in the coming years.
Elsewhere, an older form of renewable energy could play a bigger role in bringing about a diverse energy mix. Singapore is a foodie's paradise, but it does produce a high amount of food waste. Scientists here have started collecting that and putting it through an anaerobic digester, which converts it into biogas.
The microbes will eat the food waste to produce biogas and a liquid fertilizer. So the biogas is collected at the top and then sent over to the biogas storage tank. Once we get a sufficient amount of biogas, we will run the gas engine to convert the biogas into electricity, and the gas engine will then send the electricity through this distribution board and we'll send it to the hawker center where we power the fans.
Up to 150 kilograms of food waste gets collected here every day, enough to produce 1 to 5 kilowatt hours of electricity. Not enough to move the needle on energy security, but consider the impact when it's done at scale.
So in Singapore, we produce almost roughly about 800,000 tons of food waste every year. So that can actually give us quite a lot of electricity. That's equivalent maybe to about 0.5% of the nation's use, which doesn't seem a lot, but we use a lot of electricity. But if we can maybe take other kinds of waste, not just food waste, but agricultural waste and horticultural waste, that could double the amount of energy that can be produced.
A renewable energy transition gains momentum, now with the added impetus of safeguarding energy security. War in Ukraine has made energy supplies vulnerable for countries across the world. In Germany, where diversification of energy supplies has become a growing concern, attention is being turned to an underground source of energy, old as the concept of hot springs. geothermal energy.
In terms of geothermal, we're actually discovering that the potential for geothermal is larger than what we thought. And some new studies show that actually, if you look for geothermal at about a depth of 2,000 meters, there's quite a bit of potential that was unexpected, and maybe that's the same in other countries.
Drilling deeper brings access to higher temperatures, which in turn can provide greater amounts of energy.
As a very, very simple rule of thumb here. So if you go down 100 meters, the temperature rises by 3 degrees. So if you go down 1,000 meters, your temperature is at 30 degrees, and if you go down 5,000 meters, it's 150 degrees. And with 150 degrees Celsius, you can already produce electricity from the heat then. So this is in the range that it really starts to become a very interesting option.
There are 37 deep geothermal plants in Germany and 30 in the planning stage. Some produce electricity, but most, like this one, produce heat, enough for an entire district. The beauty of geothermal is that it's always on, unlike solar and wind, which are intermittent. Geothermal plants also take up less land than solar and wind farms. Ideal for land-scarce Singapore. This hot spring in the northern region of Singapore was discovered in 1909. It has long intrigued scientists and planners, with studies now underway to assess the potential of extracting energy from all that heat underground. Could Singapore really harness geothermal energy?
So usually geothermal is considered for those countries near to a shallow heat source, like volcanoes. So you can think of countries like the Philippines, Indonesia, or Japan, which sit next to the Ring of Fire. In Singapore, there is no record of volcanoes. However, the advancement in heat extraction technologies such as advanced geothermal systems and enhanced geothermal systems enable us to get access to deeper geothermal sources, which means that we can expand the regions and the countries for which we can consider geothermal.
So to find out if geothermal energy can be produced, Alessandro and his team want to drill 1.5 kilometers deep into Singapore. Then, the team will lower a probe into the hole that will measure the temperature every 25 to 50 meters. This is probably the first time this type of test has ever been done. The data will enable the team to construct an accurate map that will not only show the amount of heat available, but also the geological makeup found deep beneath the island.
At the moment, there is no studies or experiments being carried out at depth that can tell us, hey, this is the right location. Drilling these boreholes is not clear-cut. We don't know what we are going to find. What I hope, of course, is that the amount of heat information will be able to identify that there will be information that will justify and support for more research in this space, in this field in Singapore.
For me personally, been probably waiting for 7 years for the drilling. I'm excited about it, and I hope that the drilling really can go well to reach the target depth, and I hope that the temperature that we measure can be used for potential utilization that's useful for Singapore.
The drill takes place within months. Meanwhile, one industry takes steps already available to reduce its carbon footprint. Singapore is an aviation hub, which gives it a good opportunity to influence global decarbonization efforts. The global aviation industry accounts for just over 2% of CO2 emissions worldwide, but that figure is growing.
That percentage is likely to grow to over 20% by 2050 if no sufficient action is taken, because the other sectors of the economy have more straightforward paths to decarbonization. So aviation requires solutions.
Neste takes waste and residues like cooking oil and waste animal fat and converts them into sustainable aviation fuel. They are the world's largest producer.
When you burn sustainable aviation fuel, you're basically circulating carbon that is already part of the natural system.
Neste's expanded refinery in Singapore will have the capacity to produce 1 million tons of sustainable aviation fuel by the end of the first quarter of 2023. A sustainable aviation fuel pilot is also currently underway. Neste supplies the neat sustainable aviation fuel, with ExxonMobil blending it into a mixture suitable for aircraft engines. And Singapore Airlines is adopting it on all flights out of Changi Airport, on SIA and Scoot aircraft for a year.
So sustainable aviation fuels, which is a lower emission product, is one of the product solutions that will help society get us through this energy transition. Demand for lower emission fuels is expected to grow rapidly, driven by the need for energy-dense yet lower carbon fuels for the hard-to-decarbonize transportation, such as aviation, marine, and heavy-duty trucking. We plan to provide more than 40,000 barrels per day of lower emission fuels by 2025 and a further goal of 200,000 barrels per day by 2030. Achieving this goal will enable society to reduce emissions 25 million metric tons of carbon dioxide emissions for the transportation sector.
Sustainable aviation fuel costs about 4 times more than conventional aviation fuel. But more demand, greater adoption, and higher production volumes could bring prices down.
The high price is driven by the low availability of sustainable aviation fuels as well as the low production. So together as an ecosystem, we need to try and accelerate the adoption of sustainable aviation fuel, and in so doing, hope to accelerate more competitive pricing for sustainable aviation fuel.
Adoption of biofuels like sustainable aviation fuel picks up speed. Meanwhile, new work races ahead on a future fuel. Hydrogen. It's the most abundant element in the universe, and it's present in water. But extracting hydrogen from water requires energy, plenty of it. If that energy comes from renewables, then green hydrogen is produced. That's the sort of hydrogen that could move the needle on decarbonization. Green hydrogen isn't produced commercially yet, but some countries are taking early steps to pave the way for hydrogen economies. In South Korea, the city of Ulsan is aggressively pushing for the adoption of hydrogen as a transportation fuel.
수소 사회는 미래가 가는 어떤 세대이기 때문에 방향이기 때문에 이 수소의 어떤 생산이랄지 유통이랄지 이 활용 측면에서 기술을 선점하는 게 굉장히 중요하다고 생각을 합니다. 그래서 수소 차량이랄지 수소 발전 또 수소의 어떤 여러 가지 에너지원 이런 부분들을 그 얼리 어댑터 개념에서 접근을 하면은 미래의 어떤 국가 경쟁력이 되지 않느냐 그런 어떤 큰 틀에서 저희 대한민국에서는 수소 정책을 추진을 하고 있습니다.
In the suburbs, taxi driver Cho Gyum-yun refuels. It takes 4 to 5 minutes to fill it up in any of the 11 charging stations in the city. Cho switched to a hydrogen fuel cell taxi almost a year ago, enticed by generous incentives.
전기차보다는 많아요. 그러니까 수소차가 가격이 한 7,500만 원 정도 하는데 정부에서 보조해 주는 게 한 3,400만 원. 개인적으로 부담하는 게 한 4천 정도? 그 정도만 있으면은 이건 언제든지 뽑을 수가 있습니다.
There are about 2,400 hydrogen fuel cell cars in the city of Ulsan alone, and about 24,000 in all of Korea.
우리나라가 궁극적으로 이제 세계화 경쟁력 있는 분야, 그 분야로 이제 수소를 선정해 가지고 지금 정부에서 중점적으로 육성해 나가고 있는 그런 상황입니다. 여기 울산도 이제 거기에 발맞춰 가지고 지역을 기반으로 해 가지고 좀 앞서서 뛰고 있는 그런 상황입니다.
Decarbonization efforts are also underway in Korean waters. Here in Ulsan's harbor stands the country's first and only hydrogen charging station for boats. This is one of 2 boats that comes to refuel here. It's the Hydrogenia, built by homegrown ship manufacturer and developer Vinson. Just like its road counterparts, this hydrogen-powered boat drives quietly and produces no tailpipe emissions. The company isn't stopping at small passenger boats like the Hydrogenia. It's working on long-term developments for vessels of all sizes, including the safety standards and regulations.
As you know, CO2 abatement is a universal concern. Green hydrogen production and charging stations are necessary to operate hydrogen fuel cell system. New energy source and new infrastructure should be set up with new standardization on the basis of its performance and safety.
Hyundai Heavy Industries, the world's largest shipbuilder, is also taking early steps in the transition from heavy fuels to hydrogen. This is Hyundai's Innovation Center, where new technologies are developed and tested. One such innovation is a new engine, which helps make the transportation of liquefied hydrogen more efficient on ships.
선박에서는 운송 효율 높이기 위해서 액체 상태로 보관해야 되고, 그러면 탱크의 액체 상태로 저장된 수소는 항해 기간 동안 계속 증발됩니다. 그렇기 때문에 이러한 증발가스에 대한 처리를 하지 않으면은 우리가 원하는 수소를 전부 다 옮기지 못하고 제대로 설계 못하면은 항해 기간 동안 모두 날아가 버릴 수도 있는 것이죠.
The new engine utilizes the boiled off hydrogen as a secondary fuel to power the ship. That way, none of the hydrogen that's on board is wasted. The same engine would run on liquefied natural gas as its primary source of fuel.
이렇게 함으로써 선박의 연료비 운영비를 아낄 수 있고 증발가스를 효율적으로 관리하고 더불어서 수소를 섞기 때문에 선박에서 배출되는 이산화탄소량도 감소할 수 있습니다.
Over in Singapore, scientists are developing a way to produce hydrogen more efficiently. Their process uses solar energy, and it's proven in initial trials to halve the heat required to extract hydrogen, saving much energy and cost.
What we have developed in our lab is actually a different process called methane pyrolysis, where we still use methane to produce hydrogen, but without the input of water. So in doing so, we actually produce carbon nanotubes or a carbon-based product. And this carbon nanotubes is actually a valuable carbon product that we can actually sell it to end users. And one innovative thing we actually do in our lab is actually to make use of renewable solar energy to activate this process even better. They're more economical and make this hydrogen production even cheaper.
It would cost $6 to produce a kilogram of hydrogen. The lab's process theoretically brings that cost down to $2. Research like this can make the transition to hydrogen more economically feasible, whether or not production happens in Singapore.
Singapore is really a great place to work on catalysis for hydrogen production because we have talented people, we have resources, and we have state-of-the-art facilities. But we have to bear in mind that the cost of the green hydrogen is greatly associated with the cost of electricity, which is quite high in this country at the moment. So that's why we might need to consider import hydrogen from nearby countries so that eventually we will be able to have cost-effective green hydrogen to support the Singapore economy.
Energy is a key pillar of economic survival and growth, and the need for energy is only growing. The U.S. Energy Information Administration predicts that global energy demand will rise by almost 50% in the next 30 years, driven by population and economic growth, especially in developing Asian countries. Energy security has become a top priority for all countries. And in many, it's an ongoing process. These large cables are playing an increasingly important role in helping countries diversify their sources of energy imports. They're electrical cables laid into the seabed, connecting one country's electrical grid to another. When it was built, NordLink was the world's longest subsea electrical interconnector. The over 500-kilometer-long cable was the first interconnection that linked Norwegian and German power grids. This interconnector links the green energy sources of hydro in Norway and solar and wind in Germany. And for the first time, enables the exchange of these renewables between these two countries, providing energy security for both countries.
That means if one country needs energy, can import from the other country. So sometimes we import a lot of energy, especially if we don't have much sun or much wind. And on the other hand, if we have a surplus of energy, then we can export it. And if other countries don't have so much wind or green energy available, then they can import from Germany. So it's an exchange.
Singapore, too, is looking at building electricity interconnectors with its neighbors. In June 2022, Singapore began importing electricity from Laos. Hydroelectric dams in Laos generate power. The electrons are passed through interconnectors in Thailand and Malaysia before ending up on our shores. It's called the Lao PDR Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore Power Integration Project. And it could lead to greater energy connectivity among the power grids of Southeast Asian countries. The connectors allow countries to import renewable energy from other countries who have better conditions to produce it.
For this inaugural renewable importation, we are looking at 100 megawatt over a 2 years period of trial. As you can imagine, such project requires collaboration and strong partnership across the 4 countries, a government and market authority. So in terms of complexity and ease of facilitating this power integration flow, it is not without its challenges, but the fact that we managed to successfully flow the hydroelectric into Singapore with effect from end of June is testimony of the support and strong collaboration across the 4 countries.
So there are interconnectors between Malaysia and Singapore. There's an interconnector between Malaysia and Thailand, and there are interconnectors between Laos and Thailand and Vietnam. But there hasn't been an effort to interconnect all these ASEAN member states together. And that's really the vision. And as we develop regional power grids going forward, this would provide Singapore companies with opportunities to invest in regional countries, in the renewable energy resources there, and participate in the growth of the clean energy sector in the entire region.
Those opportunities are coming in fast. Singapore recently opened doors for companies everywhere to export renewable energy produced overseas to the island. This is Australia's Northern Territory. It's blazing hot, and there is little cloud cover. An ideal spot to harvest solar energy.
The vast amount of land that is available for utility-scale solar and wind generation. And married with that land is an incredible amount of renewable energy resource. The opportunity to export that energy from Australia became apparent to me several years ago.
This is what the plan looks like. Sun Cable and its partners are planning to build the world's biggest solar and battery energy storage project. It will produce 17 to 20 gigawatts of solar electricity, tied to 36 to 42 gigawatt hours of solar electricity storage, which is set to be transmitted by the world's longest subsea cables all the way to Singapore. The project is estimated to cost in excess of $22 billion and is capable of supplying up to 15% of Singapore's electricity needs.
Energy, not just electricity, but energy flows around the world. It crosses borders, it crosses oceans. That is the norm. That is the world in which we live. The way the preponderance of energy at the moment, however, is sent by ships. And there are all manner of geopolitical risks imposed on those ships. What greater interconnection can occur within the region is actually bringing neighbours closer together and making building cooperation between neighbours. So it's a great outcome, and it reduces exposure to those geopolitical risks.
Solar adoption is growing fast worldwide. Just as the performance of solar panels could soon receive a boost, researchers here are making light-capturing cells for a solar panel using a promising new material. It's called perovskite, and it converts certain parts of the light spectrum more efficiently than conventional solar cells. They could also be used in tandem with existing silicon solar cells to boost their efficiency.
Per our simulation result, the efficiency of perovskite organic tandem can surpass 28% in the near future. And the perovskite organic tandem can be fabricated on flexible, low-weight, and polymer substrate. So they are promising candidates for integrated PV with considerations of weight and flexibility.
The team recently achieved a breakthrough. A tandem cell they produced in March 2022 broke a world record in light conversion efficiency for that type of perovskite organic tandem solar cells.
Based on our Singapore Green Plan, in 2030, we're gonna deploy 2 gigawatt solar energy in Singapore. So perovskite has a potential to boost the efficiency of the industrial silicon solar cell panel from today's 23% to 30% in the next 5 or 10 years. We are really at the brink of the solar revolution.
Perhaps even a revolution for all renewables. Charles Wong has out-of-the-box ideas on how to harvest energy within cities. He founded a startup which plans solar deployment for businesses large and small. And he's beginning to look at other forms of renewable energy harnessed potentially from very unexpected places.
For example, our drainage system. As long as anything that moves, to a certain extent, is renewable energy, if you know how to harness it. So the key is to optimize, is to harness all these things that is already right next to us every day. For example, in between tall buildings is wind tunnels. We don't have wind here, but our wind tunnels are tremendously good. In between buildings, in the middle of buildings, at the top of buildings, stuff like that is what I always feel is a big wastage. What is great about Singapore is that we always take on the challenge and we turn the threat into an opportunity. Renewable energy is not a want, but a need for the whole world. And the reason being is because we all need to realize that we are merely living here. We don't actually own here. It's actually for the next generation. So we need to do our best to safekeep the environment to the best of our ability. And you could have sustainability as part of life.
Energy is the lifeblood of our economies and our lives. And a transition is picking up speed on how we create energy, how we use it, and how we build resilient supplies. Decarbonization efforts are picking up speed with ambitious targets already set by governments across the world to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2050. And greater adoption of renewable energy also bodes well for countries now increasingly concerned with energy security. The future of energy will shape the world as we know it, making it greener and more resilient.